What's up, guys? Welcome back to Jimmy Talks. So I had a video not too long ago about Venezuela, and I was dunking on neoconservatives a lot. So I want to actually explain neoconservatism because it's one of the biggest and most damaging scams that's ever been pulled on the American public. It took radical, globalist, and deeply anti-American agenda and then put it into patriotic clothing to make it look like real conservatism. It didn't just grow naturally either. It wasn't a movement that grew from grassroots kind of origin. In fact, it was actually a group of people who deliberately took over U.S. foreign policy and used America's power to push goals that usually went against the United States' interest. And really, the results speak for themselves here. We've had thousands of American soldiers that were dead in pointless 20-year desert wars that really just served as no purpose at all, trillions of dollars wasted on a failed nation-building project, and a weaker and really just less sovereign United States. And all of this quietly advanced the interests of one small foreign country in the Middle East that I can't say too much about because YouTube's AI will probably detect it and try to clap me for it. So let's just get into it. So let's look at the origins of neoconservatism, because to really understand something, we have to look back at the history. Of course, I love history. We all know that. If you watch the channel for a while, you know that. So the origins of neoconservatism are crucial to decoding its characteristics, because we need to look at the whole entire picture, right? So it did not come from the heartland of America. Like we said, this wasn't some organic grassroots American movement. And for instance, think of somebody like Robert Taft, who was really big on strong national defense in pair with non-interventionist foreign policy. But instead, neoconservatism's intellectual founders was largely a group of New York-based Jewish intellectuals. There you go. YouTube's algorithm's going to nuke me for that. But you know what? We have to say this, okay? But anyways, these intellectuals, they began their political lives on the far left. One example of this man, or one of the men, was Irving Kristol, and he was later called the godfather of neoconservatism. He was like the guy who started it, basically. And really, all these guys who started neoconservatism were former Trotskyists. And you may be saying to yourself, well, what is a Trotskyist? Well, notice how earlier I said they were far left. So let me explain this real quick. Trotskyism is a branch of Marxism, and Marxism is obviously associated with communism and socialism and the Bolsheviks and all that stuff. And Trotskyists they were named after the guy who started it, which is Leon Trotsky. And he was an ally of Lenin. But basically, long story short, leaving out a lot of details and oversimplification, maybe not oversimplification, that may be the wrong word, but basically, okay, because we're talking about neoconservatism. I don't want to focus on Trotskyism too much. But Trotskyists, they were a part of all that Bolshevik stuff. And then they broke away around the 30s and the 40s, like right before World War II. And they broke up with the Communist Party because they didn't like Stalin and all of the crimes that he did. Like I said, they were Trotskyists. They weren't necessarily aligned with Lenin and his whole entire idea, and Stalin's as well. So remember, as I just said, these were the guys who turned into neoconservatives. But basically, since they went against Lenin and Stalin, they started moving towards a more democratic socialist approach and supporting U.S. labor unions and stuff like that. And then when the new left came in the 60s, we're thinking of like the hippie era, right? This kind of ideology became a lot more dominant. And these Trotskyists, they started to get a little bit unpopular with the new left, like the hippies and the Black Power movements and all that stuff, like the Black Panthers. And this new left, they didn't really like the Trotskyists because they were soft on communism and also their cultural radicalism, which we now know is cultural Marxism today, was a bit too much for them. But in Trotskyism, there needed to be a permanent revolution. That's how they started originally. So they started to get rid of this, and they wanted to use the United States. As their ideas started to shift, as they moved away from Stalin, they were like, hey, why don't we make the U.S. now the global vanguard party? And really not for socialism around the world, but for spreading democracy and crushing totalitarianism like Soviet communism. So this permanent revolution just got repurposed into global military engagement to remake the world in America's image. The guy who was the godfather of neoconservatism, Irving Kristol, as we mentioned earlier, he even said it himself. A neoconservative is a liberal who has been mugged by reality. So these guys, yeah, this is just kind of the backstory of who started neoconservatism. Now, I mention that because we're going to keep on moving forward. Like I said, we need to know the background of them. So this lineage is not just a trivial detail of their biography. It's actually key to understanding the logic behind them. These guys used to be hardcore leftists. Then they came into neoconservatism. So you can see how this ties together, right? So as we said earlier, Trotskyism was characterized by its belief in permanent revolution, which is an aggressive internationalist or globalist, you could say, drive to overthrow existing social orders across the globe. And we can see this ever so easily because they had just wanted to have wars everywhere. They were war hawks, right? So does this make sense now? I hope so. All right, moving on. So as we said earlier, these intellectuals became disillusioned with the failures of, in their eyes, the failures of liberalism in the 60s and 70s, like we mentioned earlier, the hippies. They saw it as weakness against the Soviet Union because they hated the Soviets. Remember that. They think that it was coddling counterculture too much. So they didn't abandon their revolutionary impulse like they said. They just transferred them, as we've said already. Okay? So the Trotskyist of permanent proletarian revolution was just rebranded as neoconservatism. So this migration from left to right was not a conversion of hearts or just a change of mind, but it was just a strategic realignment. So Irving Kristol and Norman Podhoretz and all the other little Trotsky guys founded and controlled influential publications like Commentary Magazine and The Public Interest, which became neoconservatism's primary lifeline. It's how they're putting their message out. So from these platforms, these magazines, these articles they're putting out, they began a long journey through the institutions of the right wing. So they were taking their intellectual prowess and their savviness with media, and they were using it to outmaneuver the often less than sophisticated traditional conservatives. So they took these conservative ideas like isolationism and they were arguing against it. And they were saying, hey, actually, isolationism, this is naive and dangerous. I know this is a core tenet to conservatism, but this idea is dangerous because we live in the nuclear age now. So we actually have to put our global dominance around the world. So they were arguing that America must embrace its role as the world police, the global hegemony, something like that. And they have to use the military and the power of the economy to shape the world in the image of that. So this argument was pretty nice to many patriots who genuinely feared Soviet expansion. We're around the 80s right now, okay? The 80s, 70s, 80s, 90s, around there. So the neocons really just framed their radical interventionism, as we said earlier, with their permanent revolution, as the only strong stance. And they were painting any opposition to what they thought was the good idea as weak or naive or even just anti-American overall. So this was really the masterpiece of the wolf in the sheep's clothing. So they took an agenda that was fundamentally alien to American tradition and sold it as the total American ideal. Like this is really American. You know, if you're not on board with this, then you're anti-American. So let's go over the goals that they had. And before we even go over these goals, I just want to say this flat out. Neoconservatism has very clearly dangerous sets of core beliefs. So the first one, the biggest one, is that America must stay the world's only superpower, which, you know, I'm not even totally against that on the surface, but the means to get there is pretty bad. It's really not either to make America rich or safe when they are the superpower, but to go around the planet forcing every country to become a liberal democracy. I already put a video out on liberal democracy and its failures. So regular patriots see the military as a shield to protect the homeland, but neocons see it as a hammer to smash any government that they don't like and to rebuild those countries into America's image. And this image isn't what I say it should be. This is the image of Israel first and liberal democracy, the world that we live in now, right? The one that everybody is upset with. So, secondly, neocons believe the United States has a moral duty to act as the world police. Kind of just goes hand in hand with the first point that I made, but they need to invade countries, usurp dictators, regime change, and set up new democracies, whether the people there want it or not. They sold this idea about spreading freedom or something, but they were ignoring the fact that this almost never works. In real life, this gave us the disasters of Iraq and Afghanistan, something we kind of just got out of, and we were there for 20 years, but these are wars that didn't make America safer or stronger. Killed a lot of American soldiers, killed a lot of that country's people who are just people living their lives, cost trillions of dollars for us, and it left behind chaotic countries. Like Afghanistan went right back to ISIS in like a week, right? It just created terrorists out of this. So we didn't actually really do anything positive there. And a lot of GWOT veterans would probably say the same exact thing, because really all it did was just create a power vacuum. Now, we just went over how neoconservatism says that America has to be the world's only superpower, and we have to put liberal democracy in every country by using the world police to do so. So now the third goal of neoconservatism, and this is the one that everybody knows about. This is the one that's the most popular idea that people just really don't like. And that is this one. Air quote, is it good for Israel? They might not say it out loud on TV, but inside the think tanks of neoconservatism and government offices, that is really the goal there. Any country in the region that could ever challenge Israel a little bit or a lot of it, even years down the road, gets put on the hit list, no matter whether it's actually a danger to the United States or not. That's why they spent the whole entire 90s obsessed with invading Iraq, and they finally did it in 2003. And then we just had the bombings of Iran pretty recently. So Saddam was already boxed in by sanctions. He couldn't even touch America. He didn't have the means to even do so, arguably even the will. But he hated Israel and might someday have been a problem for them. So he had to go. They tried the same thing with Syria, and they've been trying it with Iran for decades. Iran is definitely anti-American, but the real reason neocons want war so badly is because Iran is the biggest roadblock to Israel being the unchallenged boss of the region. Look at somebody like Marco Rubio, who's been pushing for war against Iran and interventionist for just probably his whole entire political career, right? So the neocon plan is always the same. Put sanctions up to the maximum amount that we can do it on the countries that we don't like, talk a big, tough game nonstop, and then keep pushing bombs until somebody gives in to the neocons, like in that country. Then when the war finally comes, it'll be the American kids doing the fighting and the American taxpayers paying for it so that Israel can win. That's what it is. So you may be thinking, well, why do neocons have such a tight grasp? Why didn't somebody else just come in and say, hey, get out of here. We don't like you. These ideas are bad. But this did not happen by accident. The movement of neoconservatism and its key leaders have often held positions of dual influence, which simultaneously shaped U.S. policy while maintaining deep ties to Israel. Groups like AIPAC, which everybody knows about, and think tanks like American Enterprise Institute and the Project for the New American Century also played a big role here. And they also became the recruiting grounds and powerful platforms for neoconservative ideas. So real quick, I'll tell you, you may be like, well, what's a think tank? Why does that even matter? So basically, a think tank is a professional idea factory that studies policy issues. And this could be anything from foreign policy, economic policy, defense, healthcare, whatever. And then they try to influence what the government actually does. So basically, it's just a big group that pays smart people like professors or maybe somebody who used to be a general in the military, former government officials, or a data analyst to look at really big problems and come up with solutions for those big problems. So they'll publish reports, they'll hold conferences, they'll write papers, and they get their people to go talk to politicians. So that is how these neocon with Israeli backing think tanks were really influential. I hope that makes sense. Now, let me go back to that one think tank, Project for the New American Century. They had a document that came under a lot of scrutiny, and it was called Rebuilding America's Defenses, which called for a massive increase in defense spending and a more aggressive global posture, more aggressive with the military. And they said that a transformation to do this, like to get people to talk them into that, it would be a little bit difficult. And they said, and I quote, absent some catastrophic and catalyzing event, like a new Pearl Harbor. In other words, We need something really bad to happen for people to get on board with neoconservative ideas like attacking other countries, installing a puppet government, blah, 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 right? What happened soon after? September 11th attacks provided that perfectly for them. And the neocons, which were already deeply embedded in the George Bush administration, were now in a perfect position to implement their long-desired agendas. They quickly and they deliberately conflated the terrorism of al-Qaeda, which didn't belong to a state, with the dictatorship of Saddam Hussein in Iraq. And they used fabricated or vastly overstated intelligence about WMDs, weapons of mass destruction, to sell the Iraq war to a traumatized public. Think about this in 2000. Games, streaming, media, all that stuff, it wasn't like how it is nowadays. People actually watched TV. That's what they had. Smartphones weren't even really a thing. They weren't at all. So they go and turn the TV on and they just see airplanes flying into a building in New York City and they're like, holy shit, that's really the main information source that they had. So they were really sold on this after. Hey, 9/11, this is the perfect event to use to push our ideas. And that idea is Israel first. Don't forget that. We have to look at the backgrounds of all of this. Remember I said that? Remember the backgrounds of the people who started this, okay? They were all pro-Israel for a certain reason. I'm sure you know what that reason is. It's because of their religious background, okay? Make sense? All right, I hope so. Let's move on. I really love teaching and like this history lesson kind of stuff. Definitely going to do more videos like this. But anyways, let's get on with it. So as Hillary Clinton said, never let a tragedy go to waste. This was 9/11, a textbook example of using an American tragedy and the leverage to advance a pre-existing Israel-centric war under the false pretenses of American security. I have a whole video on 9/11, by the way. Go check it out. Okay, so now you may be thinking, okay, well, they're really aggressive for other countries and taking a stance in other countries. Well, what about America? How do they feel domestically? How do the neocons feel domestically? So, as we said already, they are globalists. So they aren't just globalists when it comes to wars, though. They are globalists right here at home as well. And that shows how little they care about America as an actual country with a real people and culture. So, on paper, they will talk just like a regular conservative about family values, patriotism, stuff that I say on the channel, but I actually mean it. And I don't have this neocon agenda to push. Everything they do, I push against wholeheartedly. Neocons out the door. Nobody likes this shit anymore. But I digress. But they'll try to sound like an actual patriot. But when it comes to stuff like immigration, they are totally on board with open borders, bringing in millions of people, changing the demographics of America, making us less sovereign. And we've seen neocons do this. There's a big neocon, his name is Bill Kristol. He was constantly saying stuff like mass immigration is great for the economy and it keeps America vibrant. What does that even mean? But again, if you watch his channel, you're probably a normal person. Or you don't like me and you stay subscribed for some reason, but that's okay. You can keep watching. It's okay. Nothing personal, buddy. But anyways, from a normal American's point of view, this is insane. Like, letting in endless waves of people changes the country forever. Talk about this nonstop. It drives down wages, H-1B wage suppression. Talk about that all the time. It breaks apart neighborhoods. They talk about the demographic change all the time. And it makes it harder for regular citizens who already live here to feel like they're living in the same nation that their parents and their grandparents and their great-grandparents grew up in. But that's the whole point for neocons. They don't believe in a real nation with a specific people, a specific history, and a specific culture. They are loyal to some abstract idea of freedom in markets that can exist anywhere on the planet. So by turning Americans into people without roots and a mixed up population with no strong ties to each other actually makes their job easier, though. It's simpler to rule over a country of strangers who don't have a shared identity to push back with. Mass immigration is not a mistake in their plan. It's a part of the plan. It's not a bug. It's a feature. So the neocons will present themselves as, hey, we're the opposite of the left. But really, this is just a misunderstood, simple binary opposition. In reality, these are two sides of the same globalist coins. Both are universalist ideologies that seek to erase national boundaries and traditional identities. Both of them do this. Neocons, which are supposedly right-wing, and woke leftists. The left does this under the banner of multiculturalism and equity and all that silly stuff that they say. And by silly, I mean they don't actually mean what they say. They have a different agenda. But neocons, they do this under the banner of democracy and free markets. Both are hostile to the nation state, though. Both of these are just projects of making people not have any roots. They want managerial elite class that sees the world as a laboratory for its social engineering projects. The neocon wars in Iraq was, in a sense, a military version of DEI. It was an attempt to bomb a foreign society into accepting a new alien system of governance. The destruction that was brought by these, like the cultural dissolution from within that was pushed by the left, and the military exhaustion from without pushed by the neocons, has brought the American nation to a severe point of crisis. So, now, I don't intend this video to be a long, deep dive into all the documents and papers and articles and this, that, and the other. I just want it to be a quick synopsis for YouTube's sake. I could make longer videos on stuff and I will, but for this video, I just wanted to do a quick TLDR, even though it is going on 21 minutes in the video now. But let's get on with the conclusion now. For anyone who puts America first, kicking neoconservatism out of power isn't just politics. This is a fight for the nation's survival. Neocons have done more damage to America than any foreign enemy ever could. They are like a parasite that hollowed America out from the inside. A real patriot does not see them as just well-meaning war hawks who they just got a little carried away. No. A real patriot sees them as people pushing an agenda that's straight up hostile to regular Americans, whether they admit it or not. The whole ideology of neoconservatism is poison, and it has to be ripped out of American politics, out of our government. It is not a good thing. So many people are waking up to this now, but it wasn't like that for a long time. Now a lot of people are rejecting it wholeheartedly, which is great. But what do people actually want? Like, okay, we got rid of neoconservatism. We're ignoring them. They're all silly. They're doofuses. They're dumb. What should we do? What we want instead is just simple common sense. The military's job is to protect the United States and Americans. Period. Not to fight endless wars for Israel, or to chase a daydream about turning the whole world into democracies. Next, the government's number one duty is to look out for the safety, the jobs, the culture of Americans, the future of actual American people, not some open borders global system run by the elites. And finally, real countries with real borders and real citizens are the only thing that works. Everything else is a fantasy, straight up. The 20 or 30 years when neocons ran the show in the past were disastrous. It was a wrong turn. They dressed up as conservatives while dragging the country into a ditch without any plans to pull them out of it. If we ever forget what neoconservatism did to America or let them sneak back in, the United States as we know it is finished. All right, guys, that's all from me today. God bless you and your families. Love all you patriots. Follow me on Rumble. Follow me on X. In case YouTube nukes me, you'll be able to see videos still. All right, guys. God bless you and your families. America first and only. I say this at the end of every single video, and I mean it. Jimmy Talks out.